Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Human Performance Outliers podcast with Zach Bitter. All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Human Performance Outliers podcast. I'm your host, Zach Bitter, and today I have part 2 of a guest interview that I did with Pam Smith. For those of you who listened to the first one, we went over Pam Smith's legendary ultramarathon running career. I wanted to talk to Pam originally because she has one of the widest reaches successfully done in the sport of ultramarathon running, in my opinion, on the women's side of the sport. So the interesting thing about ultramarathon running, for those of you who only loosely or don't follow it at all, is we tend to call the sport ultramarathon running and then loop a ton of variety into that. So I've talked about this a lot in the past, but I mean, you can do a 50-kilometer road race. That's an ultramarathon. You can do a multi-day 200 plus miler out on some remote trails, and that's also an ultramarathoner. And that's not even the extent of it all. So it does become sort of this umbrella term that refers to a lot of pretty unique disciplines that sometimes contradict one another in terms of where the skill sets that are going to make you successful on them. So I'm always interested when I bump into someone or hear about someone or follow someone who has been able to really fine tune and be highly successful at a very wide variety of this discipline that we call ultramarathon running. And Pam Smith is right up there near the top with, historic wins and internationally quality times and distance covered and timed events and things like that. So I recorded a podcast just to go over her career. Another thing that makes Pam unique is she wasn't just a professional runner. She has a family and she had a full-time job while she was winning the races and competing for podium spots at the height of her career. So I outlined, or I shouldn't say I outlined, we talked about a lot of that and everything that kind of went into it with her on episode 342 of this podcast, if you're interested in that background. For today's interview, the reason I had her back for part 2 was one of her more iconic races was the 2013 Western States 100, where it was a historically hot year. Pam Smith came back to the race after finishing near the back. So Western States has a 30-hour cutoff. And that means if you are not across that finish line at exactly 30 hours, then you don't get a completed finish registered. You don't get the belt buckle. You don't get any recognition really of completing the race. So it is like the last chance to get across that line and get yourself a finish. Pam finished near the back in just under 29 hours that year. And now Pam had been in the top 10 prior to that. So that was definitely not her best day, but she gutted it out and got it in. But the thing that makes it really interesting is she returned the next year, not only won it, so she went from the back to the very front in 1 year's time and also cracked the top 10 overall. She was actually 9th overall that year too. So winning the women's side of the race, 9th overall, historically hot year, really cool story behind it. I wanted to hear about how she prepared for it, how she approached the race itself, what the mindset was like going into that after the prior year and everything. That kind of went into that, and also just get some tips too, because Nicole, who actually came on and helped me co-host that one, is running Western States this year. Nicole's done Western States a number of times. She's actually been top 10 on 3 different occasions, and she just recently raced herself in through one of the golden ticket races to get back on that starting line this year. So we thought it'd be worthwhile to talk to Pam and find out what went into her best performance on that course, and hopefully give Nicole a little bit of a lesson in terms of what she can do in these next few months while she gets ready for that race itself. So hopefully you enjoy this interview and get a chance to hear a little bit more from Pam. Coming up on the podcast, actually, for those of you who follow the sport a little closely, or maybe even not, this race has gotten pretty popular just outside of the sport of ultramarathon, is the Barclays Marathon, which is just a really interesting event because it's got a lot of characteristics of ultra running, but it's also got a lot of unique things about it where you essentially, it's really hard to get into, first of all, because there's like a limit of how many people they can have out there on these trails. And a lot of people apply. So there's like a lot of different steps you have to go through. You have to like write an essay and do a whole bunch of different stuff to just get into the race. And then on top of it, it's built to be one of the more difficult races to finish. In fact, after this year, I should say, there's only been 17 total people to finish the race. So it's a 5-loop course. They call it the Barclays Marathon. It's sort of described as 100 miles, but I think everyone who's done it knows it's probably quite a bit further than that. The reason nobody knows is you cannot wear a GPS watch. In fact, they give you like a really cheap, just like standard watch so you can tell the time, and that's about it. And that's what you have. So the course isn't marked. You have to gather pages from, I think it's 10 books each loop to show that you hit certain check marks along the way. And weather can be a huge component to it. It's just a wild event. So a lot of years, nobody finishes. It's like exciting when one person does. This year was historic in the sense that 3 people finished it. One of those people, John Kelly, finished for the second time. In fact, he was the last person to finish it. He finished in 2017. So John's coming on the podcast to talk about just the Barclays Marathon, his experience with that type of racing, which has a pretty big orienteering component to it, as you may probably imagined as I described how that kind of plays out. I want to hear like what he's doing, what his background is like in terms of getting him ready for something like that, and just his view on everything played out the day. He was actually the second finisher on that day. Again, like I said, the last finisher before this year, and now is a 2-time Barclays finisher, which is legendary. So it'll be fun to talk to John, get a little bit of perspective on that side of ultramarathon running. Also, for those of you who like the nutrition type topics, I am currently scheduling a podcast with Amy Berger. Amy's been on the podcast a long time ago. She's interesting to me in the terms that she is a dietitian and also is really knowledgeable of low carb ketogenic diets. She's very open-minded about like the ways to construct those though. So I want to get a feel for her and what she's seeing within that space in terms of just different ways that tend to be more successful for people in terms of programming these sort of things, what variants she makes with them when it comes to folks who have more of an active lifestyle versus maybe a little more of a sedentary lifestyle, and they're looking for it for therapeutic reasons and things like that. And just catch up with seeing where she's at and where the research has been. I know it's one of those things where as it gains momentum, more and more stuff gets done, more and stuff gets highlighted. So it's always fun to kind of talk to people who are like really in the weeds on that sort of stuff. Sort of a combination of two, the performance and nutrition side of things. This week, I'm also recording an episode with Dan Plews. I've actually mentioned that one a few episodes ago. We actually had to reschedule the recording. So it is coming. It's coming this week. So for those of you who are on the show Patreon page, you'll probably see that one pop up there at the end of this week or early next week at the very latest. And those will be some fun ones. I want to talk to Dan about a variety of things, including the most recent paper that was released about low carb performance. I did a podcast episode on that, I believe episode 341, where I kind of just went over the outline of it and then gave a few thoughts on what I think it maybe shows, doesn't show. Inevitably, all these studies have limitations because you can't answer all the questions people have in one study without, an endless budget and an endless amount of time. So there's always going to be limitations. There's always going to be questions that come up after. There's always going to be things that people consider flawed or weak within it. So I just kind of went over the details of it, talked about what I thought was interesting, talked about what I thought would maybe be an interesting next step, if possible, in terms of looking at that sort of a topic. But I'll be curious about Dan because Dan is, he's got an age group record at Kona for triathlon. He just recently won a half Ironman. He has a lab in New Zealand, and he works with a lot of endurance athletes, including some low carbers, and he himself follows a lower carbohydrate approach to his training and racing. So I like to talk to Dan whenever it comes to low carbohydrate performance, find out what we know, what he thinks are maybe coming down in terms of some new research or some new findings that he's seeing in his lab and other things like that. So that'll be a fun chat if you're interested in that sort of thing. Before we get rolling, just a couple quick announcements. If you want to support the show and get the podcast early, ad-free, you can do that by accessing episodes through the show's Patreon page and support the podcast. You can find links and details to joining the show's Patreon page by heading over to zachbitter.com/HPO. You can also find other ways to support the show on that same URL, zachbitter.com/HPO, along with the full catalog of episodes. So if you want to go back and see what episodes are available that maybe are interested to you, if you're not following along routinely, that's a good spot to check out the details and find out which ones you want to maybe download and throw on your phone as you're out there working out on the weekends or in the mornings or the afternoons during the week, whenever you happen to train and need a little bit of a auditory distraction from the work at hand. Also, if you are not subscribed to the podcast, please head over there and do that. If you subscribe, it'll automatically get sent to your phone, and then you'll be kept up to date when new podcasts are released. That also helps me grow the show. Great way to support, along with sharing episodes you enjoy with your friends and family on social media. That goes a long way to help support the show in a non-monetary way if it is something that you are interested in. Also, if you're looking for a little bit of support with your training, you can head over to zachbitter.com. There I have a bunch of different options for coaching, including pre-made plans. If you just want to follow my philosophy, I also have consultations you can sign up for where you can hop on a call with me and we can chat about whatever it is you want to talk about. If you got a list of questions, if you want to ask about some of the training stuff you're doing and think that I might have some valuable input on there, those options are all available at zachbitter.com. Finally, I have a group run in Austin that anyone listening to this is welcome to come to. If you happen to be in Austin, whether you live here or are visiting, we meet at 9 a.m. at Metz Park. Details to that from a week-to-week basis is found on Instagram at OutliersATX. So if you want to meet up and run a few miles with me, we've got a few different options there, lots of different paces. So it is an all-comers, all-welcome type of a setup group run that Sunday morning. Check that out if interested. Before we get rolling, just a quick shout out to one of the show's primary sponsors this year, Element-T Electrolytes. They are my go-to electrolyte supplement. They make a very convenient product that has these little packets that include 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, and 60 milligrams of magnesium. Last year, I got my sweat test done, and it turns out I lose 614 milligrams of electrolytes for every liter of fluid lost during a workout or throughout the day. So I'll usually mix one of those packets in about 2 liters of water if I'm going out for training sessions. I'll also use their chocolate flavor sometimes in the morning with my coffee. It makes a perfect mix if I use like maybe half a packet of that, some coffee, some heavy cream. Hits the spot, sends me out to my morning session, ready to roll. They are currently running a special for HPO podcast listeners, which is a free sample packet with any purchase. So if you go to drinklmnt.com/HPO, you will be prompted to receive that free sample pack with your first purchase. So what that'll allow you to do is figure out, first of all, if you enjoy the product, and second of all, which flavor is your favorite. My favorites right now, chocolate with that coffee in the morning and watermelon for any of my fluids that I'm drinking throughout the day or out on workouts. So if that's any help for you, those would be a good starting points in my opinion. So head over to drinklmnt.com/HPO to check out their stuff. You can also access those links in the show notes or on the show sponsor website, which is zachbitter.com/HPO sponsors. Welcome back, Pam.
Thank you.
And for those of you watching the video will already know, but I also have Nicole, my wife, here to chat. So we got a 3-person podcast episode for you today. And for those of you who did not listen to part 1 with Pam, we went over her career as an ultramarathon runner, kind of what makes her unique, everything that went into the career, including like having a family, a career, and everything else that kind of goes alongside the actual training and racing side of the things that she was doing. So definitely go check that one out if you want that full picture, because today we're going to take some time to just dive into one of the many race results that Pam produced over her career, which was, I'll let Pam confirm or deny this, but I think it was probably one of her more impressive performances, where in 2013, you went back to the Western States 100, which at the time, people probably maybe would have considered it the most competitive 100-miler in the world. Now it's maybe second behind UTMB, but like UTMB and Western States are like the 2 big ones for the most part. And you had a year prior to that where you were at the race. You had some success at that event. but you had a rough day and finished just over an hour before the cutoff where they don't let you finish any longer. You return the next year and you win it. So you go from like the back of the pack to winning it, and not only winning it, but finishing the top 10 overall on what was, I think, a pretty rough year weather-wise, which I think we're going to get into a little bit of this episode. But Nicole and I are really excited, especially since she's running Western States this year, just to kind of hear more about what you did in that year to figure out how to find yourself standing at the top of the podium. And yeah, everything that kind of went into the day and the preparation and everything like that.
Yeah, no, I'll echo your thoughts there, Zach, because I mean, as a female who also has a full-time job and is just a super fan of Pam and all she's done, it's just exciting to chat and hear about kind of her secret sauce and how she executed on that day. So we're just happy to get to talk to you, Pam.
Yeah, thanks. I'm excited to talk about it too. Always fun to relive the glory days, right?
Yeah, let's relive it. Yeah. Awesome. Did you have any goals for that day? Like going in, was there like a higher, or was there like a tiered level of like, hey, I think I could win this thing today? Was that even in the mindset at the time?
Yeah, so it's really funny. Like I actually went into 2013, and as you mentioned, I had a terrible 2012. I was really fit in 2012. I had placed 5th at the 100K World Championships in April of that year. It was still my PR for the 100K distance. I was just really fit. And then 2012 was the year that they got into a lot of snowstorms and hail. And I was just underprepared and made stupid mistakes. And so it had nothing to do with fitness, but rather execution. Like my execution on the day was just terrible. And not only was I disappointed, but I was actually a little bit embarrassed by that. You know, I always considered myself as somebody who ran smart, did things in a good way and made good decisions on race day. And on that day, I just did not, and it didn't pan out well. So, you know, my whole goal going into 2013 was that like, I was going to execute everything correctly. Like I wanted to do all the things and do all the things right. And I just figured if I did that, I could run about 18:30. That was the time goal I had, was 18:30. I never was concerned about who else was around me. I never looked at the ultra sign up list ahead of time. Like the competition didn't matter to me because my whole goal was just to prove that I could run that race well. And so that was like kind of how I went into the race. I had an idea that if I ran 18:30, which is what I thought I could do, I would be in the top 3. I figured like historically that's about where it would be. So yeah, I mean, I was kind of thinking if I did my race and I executed, I'd probably be on the podium, but it wasn't like go all out. I have to win this race. Like that just was not the focus.
Yeah, that's always interesting because I think like for one, that mindset I think is so important because with a race like 100-mile distance, there's a level that I think when people really analyze what they're capable of, you can get semi close to knowing what you're capable of. And if you try to stretch out beyond that because you think someone else is potentially able to do, say, like if you'd gone in there thinking like, oh, well, 18 flat is what I need to win it, therefore I'm going to force 18 flat, then maybe things turn out a little more like the year prior. But since you kind of stayed in your own realm of what you thought was possible based on your training and fitness, you're able to kind of avoid some of those mistakes I think a lot of times people make early on in a 100-mile race where they get chasing when it's too early and also maybe outside their reach.
Yeah, and I think I did actually change my focus for 2014. You know, I was coming back as the reigning champion and there was a lot more pressure. And I think for that race, I was very concerned about winning. Like I wanted to win again. And it did feel a little bit more stressful. I was watching people from the get-go. It was like, ooh, how fast is she going to go? Ooh, is she ahead of me? What's the splits? And I think that kind of added to the stress on the day. And ultimately I ended up 4th that year. And again, I think some of it was kind of that mindset. So yeah, I was sort of in the perfect mindset of 2013 that was like, nope, nothing else matters. It's just my race. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to kind of carry that mindset into the following year.
No, I love that I agree with Zach there. I mean, I think it's so easy to get focused on what other people are doing, right? But just really when you're executing to your best, I think it always just works out when you are just focused on your own goals. It just seems like that is like the sweetest. And then when you have success on those days, it just feels like you did it for all the right reasons, right? Which I think at the end of the day is kind of like also important, is kind of like just proving that you are your best self on that day. I don't know. That's kind of how I've always seen it. Um, and just curious too, like how did your mindset change that day in any way as you got out onto the course? Because we know that it was certainly a challenging day.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was going to be hot, and we knew that ahead of time, that it was going to be a really hot day. And I remember AJW standing at the pre-race meeting and telling people, take your pace chart and throw it out the window because it's going to be too hot today. And I just was like, no, I think if I execute this okay, like I can still run about the time that I was hoping to run. And so I was like, I'm just going to focus on that. So like in terms of the heat, I didn't really try to change too much. I just had it in my mind that I would try to stay as cool as possible and keep on the like sort of the pace that I had in mind. I think what sort of changed was that even though I was sort of thinking that I could run maybe a podium position, I didn't expect to get into the lead as early as I did. I took the lead over at mile 38. And I had told my husband, like, don't expect me to be in the top 3 until after Forest Hill. And so he was like, what are you doing? Like, why are you in the front of this race? And it was like, I don't know. Like, I'm running easy. This is how it feels to run. And I knew I wasn't going to take the lead from the get-go. That was never the plan, to like lead from the beginning, and sort of just kind of move up gradually. But I did end up taking the lead like earlier than I expected. And I think the way that like that kind of changed things was then you don't get quite the accurate splits as to how far ahead you were. And so we were always having a little bit delay, but as we were getting the splits, it kept finding out that, they were growing. So I was getting farther and farther ahead. And so, that started to make it feel like, okay, I can calm down, just keep doing exactly what I'm doing at this point. I'm actually doing it right. And so, that actually was a really like reassuring feeling whereas I know sometimes when you're in the lead, you kind of have that, oh my gosh, now what? Like now I've got to keep it. And there's sort of this extra pressure, but fortunately it was kind of like, no, it actually allowed me to calm down a little bit.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about it because there's definitely a mental shift that takes place, I think, when you're in a position where you're chasing, even if like, oh, wait, the expectation right now is that I'm not in the lead, to being in the lead. And now you're like, okay, what do I do with this kind of a mentality? But yeah, so when you took the lead that early, were you just like kind of were you continuing to just do like kind of status checks frequently as to like, okay, is this effort actually right? Or am I now kind of artificially pushing subconsciously because I know there's people behind me? How did that kind of play out?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I always use the mantra, check yourself before you wreck yourself. You got to like kind of be checking in and early on and being very honest about like, is the pace that you're running early going to be something that you can run late? And, it still felt really easy to me. The one thing that did throw me off is, I actually had chugged a big Ensure at Robinson Flat, and like 2 miles outside of Robinson Flat, I just totally puked everything. And I think it was just because it was a little bit warm and it wasn't sitting in my stomach really well. And I was not a person who usually threw up in races. So that took me kind of as a shock. It was like, uh-oh, like what's happening? And the funny thing was, is though, once I threw up, like I felt immediately better. And all of a sudden I felt so light. And then like a couple miles after that, I passed Joelle Vaught and actually took the lead. And it was like, oh, I just feel light and like this is easy right now. So yeah, it just kind of happened naturally, and it didn't seem like, okay, I've got to push this. And I actually was planning to run with Joelle for a little bit, and then she was like, okay, go ahead, I'll see you later, or something like that. And I was like, oh, okay. And so no, I didn't feel like it was really like straining to take over and stay in the lead when it first happened.
Yeah, no, it sounds like you're having one of those days where it's just like in the back of your mind, you kind of know like that you have some tools you can work with because of how things are playing out. And even if I don't want to call them mistakes, but when you have days where you feel like that it's almost like things that would present themselves as a mistake in hindsight on lesser years or worse races just don't end up creating problems for you down the road. So you kind of find yourself in a position where, like, I think with 100 miles, you're always presented with choices to make. And then it's like, how many times can you make the right choice versus the wrong choice? And then the days that go really well tend to be the ones that you made the right choice more often than not.
Yeah.
But then you have days, like it sounds like you had at Western States, where let's say there's 3 options and all 3 of them probably work for you that day. So you're just kind of going with it and rolling into the lead pretty early.
Yeah. And I mean, I never had the split where you look at it and go like, wow, she just destroyed that section, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I also never had the split where it was like, ooh, she had a low during that. It was just very consistent effort throughout the entire day.
Mm-hmm. What was it like going through Forest Hill in the lead? Because you had been in the lead for a while at that point. You had gone through the canyon section, which is like a spot I think people are usually very tuned into, as it can be a spot that sort of chews people up a bit, especially when it's warm. You're coming into Forest Hill, which is one of the more populated aid stations traditionally in the lead. What was your thought process at that point?
I mean, that was super exciting just because, there is kind of the crowd and they're cheering. So you get to sort of soak up that time and kind of everybody getting excited for you. But it was actually extra special for me because my kids actually came out and were at Forest Hill. So like I got to, kind of hug them, give them a little kiss and everything and see them there. And that was kind of fun to be like, hey, like my family's out here. They get to see me doing this. They see me leading this. And, it just kind of felt like, I got to share that with them a little bit and then have them there and then also get the energy and sort of the motivation from them being there as well.
Yeah. Well, and for them too, because they see you from a whole different angle than any of us watching you as a fan, because it's like, to them, you're their mom, you're their mom. You're also like, making their lunches and things like that.
Yeah.
And
oh no, they think this is crazy. They're like, why is she out there doing that?
Yeah. Well, I think also like for them, probably long term, it probably gives them that like, I think as a kid, you take away things from what your parents do, right? I mean, it's like that element of persistence, like not giving up, like working hard. I think, kids do emulate all of that from their parents. And so I'm sure like in the back of your mind, it's like, okay, I'm out doing this long race, but I think they're probably taking away a lot of good qualities, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah. Well, you have great kids, Pam, so I'm sure it all worked. It all clearly they were emulating you.
Yeah.
I want to talk a bit about just like the logistics of kind of both the race itself as well as the preparation for it, because obviously you won the race, so things went well to a large degree in the preparation phase and then the race execution itself. But when I talk about Western States with some of my coaching clients who do that race, I usually start with saying, well, think of Western States as kind of 3 unique 50Ks, where like you're kind of in a situation where there's enough variance from one section to the next that if you're really, really good at one type of running and maybe worse at another, you've got to be aware of that and make sure you're not overextending in the spots where you're going to have some weaknesses, or leaving something on the table during your strength sessions or strength areas and things like that. Just know like what is going to work for you at the individual level with that kind of unique build out versus like someone who maybe has the opposite set of strengths and weaknesses. When you decided to do, well, first of all, I should ask, how did you get back into Western States? Because obviously you didn't race back the year before, but
no. So I went to Run Rabbit Run, which at the time was a golden ticket race.
Oh, okay.
And I said that I was going to give myself one shot to get in. And I wasn't going to ask for any favors or any sponsorships or anything. I was going to go to one race. And if it was meant to be, it was meant to be. And I ended up winning Run Rabbit Run and got the golden ticket. So then that's how I got in. So I was like, okay, it's meant to be. That was kind of the sign that like I should go back to Western States. So that was in September. So I actually had a pretty good advanced notice that I was going to be in, even more so than the people getting in through the lottery and stuff. So I had a long time to get up to that. Once I did get in, it was clear to me that like in order to do the race correctly, Western States had to be my primary focus for the year. So unlike 2012, where we had the 100K World Championships in April, in other years I had run, either Miwok or American River. I was like, I'm not going to do any major races in April or May and like just have that whole time to be training. And so I think that was something that was really helpful to me as well, was like, now there's so many races and people are kind of trying to fit in 100 different things, or, even using races for training and stuff, which I still like to do. But like, I just didn't want to do a big effort, long race in the like 2-3 months leading up to Western States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's great. You get in September, you can really kind of start building things out early. And yeah, that's the biggest thing with Western States is it's like, unless you get in early enough through either the lottery or one of the early golden ticket races, you're sitting in a situation where you sort of have to plan 2 years. And if you get in, kind of pivot towards that. If you don't, then, maybe find something comparable in a similar timeline so your training doesn't deviate too much from what was before. When did you say like, okay, this is, or did you, I should even say, like, did you say like, okay, this is Western States, starts now, preparation for it? Was that after the new year at some point, or were you already starting to put things in place as at the end of 2012?
Yeah, right about the new year was about right. I did run Desert Solstice in 2012, and so I kind of took some downtime after that for a couple of weeks, and then the holiday season and everything, and so kind of coming back New Year's. And I've never been a streak runner. I've always felt like I need to take a day off whenever I need a day off, and I haven't wanted to have that obligation or pressure. But I started on January 1st, and I was like, I'm just going to run at least 3 miles a day for as long as it feels right. And and so that kind of kicked things off. And I was like, I just need to get into the habit of running every single day, and the mindset that like, I'm going to be training hard pretty much every single day. And so I only made it 78 days, which is not impressive in terms of streak stuff, but I think put me in that mindset of like, okay, every day is a day that you get up and you focus on training. And then kind of coming off the 78 days of that was, about the time where I was like getting into the higher mileage and doing stuff. So like I like to have a built-in, a time that I can rest if need be. So I think it kind of transitioned from sort of low mileage consistently to then ramping up to the higher mileage weeks.
I love that you say that you're not afraid to take a day off. You give me hope, because this week I was sick and I took a couple of days off, and I just like, the older I get, the less guilty I feel, just simply because it just feels like you need to recover. And if you don't give yourself the time, but it's always nice hearing somebody else say it, right?
Yeah. And my peak 3 weeks, I had this lofty goal that I was going to do 3 100-mile weeks in a row. I just thought that would be like peak training. And I made it the first 20 days, and I had the final Sunday, I had 13 miles to go. So I was at 287 miles for 20 days. And I got up and I was like, I do not feel right. I don't want to run. And so instead of doing that 13 miles, I went back to bed that afternoon and I slept for 3.5 hours, and I took that day off. So like I never made it. I didn't make the goal, but I think by doing that rest and taking that nap, like that actually was what I really needed at that time. So, I was kind of in tune to the idea that like, yes, I'm pushing hard, I'm training hard, but like, you don't want to go overboard with that. So yeah, I think when you get to those days where you're just like, I need the rest more than the run, like, you probably do, and I try to listen.
No, I think that's so wise. And I think so many runners fall trap of like feeling like they have to stick to the plan, right? Even when they're not feeling good. And I think that's to the detriment of their success, because I do think like from a longevity perspective, having the kind of the mindset that I'm going to take the rest that I need is so critical. But it's nice to hear you say that. Did you have any specific workouts that you relied on that you felt like were kind of confidence builders?
Yeah, so I like to do one workout on the treadmill, and I just do 3/4 of a mile at 10% grade, and it's only at 10-minute mile pace. So it's not like you're busting it, but I try to do 5 of those with like a quarter mile, just rest in between them. But it just feels like if I can do that, I can plod up the hills of Western States. Like some of the grade and the uphills at Western States are very runnable if you have the running legs. And so for me, that kind of made me feel like my uphill legs were strong and could kind of take on some of those sections, like Bath Road and coming out of Michigan Bluff and kind of some of those roads. And you can make up a lot of time if you're actually able to run those sections. And then I was also doing hill hikes on Fridays. I would just hike up hills and then run down them hard. And I think the downhills, just doing that downhill kind of gets you sort of this, season the quads, kind of like people say. So it wasn't really that intense of a workout because I'm not really pushing myself that hard. I was really just walking up the hills, but then to get that sort of that pounding on the quads. So those two things I was kind of doing weekly as sort of uphill and downhill type of like workouts to be ready for the hills.
So Nicole, you've got two options now to build into your plan. One is the treadmill, which is a quarter mile away. And the other is Hill of Life. You can hike up that and run down and get that eccentric downhill and that good hiking up at that spot or somewhere similar to that. I think those are.
Yeah. I mean, I live in Salem. And so like it's 250 feet elevation. And so like the hill that I was hiking was only a half mile long. It's not like on a weekly basis I could get to the mountains. I was trying to do that on the weekends, but my daily stuff was not on gnarly terrain. And that's why for me, I had to, employ the treadmill and employ just this little half mile hill in town kind of thing. And I think it gains 350 feet and a half a mile or something. It's not anything and it's paved. It's not a crazy hill or anything, but like just finding the tools that you can and using them, you can get pretty far with that if you're creative.
Yeah, no, I think that's helpful. And that's kind of something that I feel like is consistent with kind of where we live here in Austin. We have some, decent rolling hills, but it's definitely not.
No 3 mile climb.
There's not really the mountainous terrain. But I can just picture our little pup Minnie running down the Hill of Life, dragging me along. So I'm sure that will be great for me.
She's the one who wins in this big time, one way or the other.
Yes.
She's like, don't go to the treadmill. What are you talking about?
Yeah. She is like a built-in running partner who I can't tell you how much the little dog loves to run. So.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Pam, I'm curious too about just the kind of the trajectory throughout the new year through the race itself. I know you mentioned the treadmill workout and then the hill workout stuff that were kind of some cornerstone ones that you were doing around. Were you doing anything unique with like intensity based workouts in terms of like an order of which you did them? I know like within ultra running, I mean, personally, I think with ultra running, like when you get into the 100-mile distance, it's like, it's just a unique experience given how low intensity is relative like Olympic distance stuff. There's probably multiple pathways that are going to get you there in a lot of cases. But one of those that I've leaned on a fair bit, and I know others have in the past, has been kind of moving some workouts that you'd maybe consider important, but less specific to the intensity that you'd be doing on race day earlier in the plan, so that when you get to that kind of final phase, you can kind of push your training load towards more, like it sounds like you were doing with those higher volume weeks at the end of it, and kind of have that space to be able to do more race specific type intensities as you get closer to it. Were you working on anything like that, or did you come into that training plan with a lot of speed work because of World 100Ks a year before and thought I can lean on that? Or what was your kind of mindset around that?
Yeah. So you mentioned how you broke Western States up into 350Ks. And I kind of, when I was doing my training, broke it up more into the components. And, the first component being it's 100 miles, that's a long way to go in the endurance component. And then of course the hill component, which I sort of already addressed, and then kind of the management and the extras, like the weather, the eating, altitude, those kind of things. So those were sort of my 3 focus points when I was training. For the 100 miles and like just getting to that, for me, the main goal was amassing fitness. Just like if you're fit and you have a lot of endurance, you're going to do well at 100 miles. That was kind of my mindset going in with that. So I actually was doing Monday's track workouts with Marathon Group. and they're just road, and I did whatever they did, and I didn't make it specific to my race or whatever, but it was kind of this idea that if I'm getting fitter, if I'm getting faster, if my recovery is getting better, all of that is going to help me in the end when I get to 100 miles. And so it was kind of just this like goal for general fitness. And so, yeah, I was doing some like marathon type track workouts. And then I'm not a back-to-back person. Like I don't do back-to-back long runs. I was doing a long run on Saturdays, and then I would do on Wednesdays what I would call a midweek medium. And so something like in the 12 to 15 mile range. And I would usually do a couple of miles of tempo in there just to kind of boost the sort of the bang for my buck in that workout, to get a little bit more endurance out of it.
Nicole's grinning from ear to ear right now because she joins a road running group a couple times a week, and one of those days is a workout day where they're typically doing something in preparation for like half or full marathon type stuff. So yeah, it's funny because like one thing I think we learned over the pandemic about Nicole was for her to just kind of not focus on the part of ultra running that I think catches everyone's eye at first. Like, oh, I'm running 100 miles. I got to just get out there and run all the time. I got to do like countless hours, big weekends, the whole kind of like go big or go home type of mentality, and really realized that like speed work for a good chunk of the early phase of her training really did put her in a position where when we do get to the point where like, say you're 6 weeks out from the race, now maybe we get out on the course and do some longer efforts and lean a little more into volume, just so you feel confident and you can really feel the pacing and everything like that, and work on the nutrition and work on like what gear you're going to use and all that stuff. And you always find that you get quite fit with that path.
Yes. Well, I mean, I have to say, I like the social aspect of like training with my
Absolutely.
friends, right? To do the workouts with them. So there's that element that I think is helpful. And just, I happen to have a friend who I ran with in college who now like we're reunited after 20 years. So it's kind of fun to like get to train with her. But Pam, I don't know, like the older I get, I just don't like spending oodles of hours like doing really long runs on the trails all the time. Like I can't find joy in that as much. I mean, I can definitely enjoy it for, a couple of months at a time, but then I like to go back to more moderate stuff. So you make me feel better about that, because I don't know, on my weekends, like I almost just need the time to just recover from the work week. Right. And so
Yeah.
that makes me feel better.
Well, and I've never done a training run longer than 30 miles. Like
Yeah,
I've done some
that's
adventure run, like sometimes I'll fit the adventure runs in, or you get a race for 50 miles or something like
Yeah.
that to have the ones in there. But to me, I feel like I get everything I need out of 30 miles. I can practice my eating, I can have the fitness, whatever. And I don't need to slog it out for 40 or 50 to feel that. I just feel like I get more tired from that and more mentally drained from that. So
that
I
makes me
wasn't
feel
like the
happy.
person that, you power to you if people are doing that. But like, I didn't feel like that was a necessary part of my training to just do like an all day 50 miler or whatever.
Yeah, no,
Mhm.
that's so nice to hear, because that I can't stomach that kind of stuff anymore. And it doesn't really bring me joy either. And I feel like I go in a hole. So that's great to hear.
It's a really interesting topic too, because I think like I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with back-to-back long runs, but where I think a lot of people go wrong with it is it's not unique to their race intensity. So they do the back-to-back framework, but they're running significantly faster than they're going to be on the day that they run 100 miles. So they're really not even practicing what they'll be doing on race day to a close enough degree where it's going to do them the favors they want. And then back-to-back long runs faster than goal 100-mile intensity is going to take future training off your plan for the most part. So you have to be asking yourself, what is the trade-off to do this? So like when I'm working with someone, if it's like, we really want that this person just needs some experience working with some of the like longer duration type stuff, from fueling, gear, just knowing on that second day they can go out and cover some ground or some time on feet, just to confirm in their mind, okay, I can wrap my head around this. Cool. But if they're out there running 4 or 5 minutes per mile faster than they're going to average on race day, we're missing out on something down the road in most cases there. So it's like, if that person isn't going to be able to hold back and do it like that, then it's like they're much better off doing just a typical, probably marathon long run style and kind of carrying on that way and accumulating that training load over the course of their plan versus sacrificing future training.
Yeah, no, I'm not speaking out against back-to-backs as something that people should do, but it just didn't work for me. You know, I had a family, and to sacrifice both weekend days was just not something that I could do and feel good about. Like, so Sundays, and because I was, like I said, doing this marathon track stuff, we were doing that on Mondays. If I did that on, if I did back-to-backs, then I wouldn't make it through the track workout. So Sunday was just a really good day for me to take off. Like, that was my rest day, or at least a very easy day for me. It left me sort of kind of recovered to start the new week. And it also gave me a time to like hang out with family and be able to do that. But, kind of like what you're saying about, new people, if they need the second day to kind of give them confidence, like I truly believe in that. Like, the training that you need is the training that gives you the confidence to feel like you have the training you need, And so, like, for me, I just knew that like going through a 30 miler, doing all of the eating stuff, like when your stomach starts to turn at, 20 miles, or you hate a gel after 5 or 6 hours, but you have to force yourself to eat something, like that was easier for me to practice in one long run rather than like having the reset of the next day where, your stomach is better, your outfit is better, you're not sweaty anymore, you're not hot anymore. And so it was kind of like all of the like additional things of ultra running were easier to practice or better to practice in one long run. And so that's for me, like between that and my family, like that's kind of how it boiled down to me. I think some people like the back-to-backs and that gives them the confidence. And like you said, it teaches them to do the things that they need. And so, yeah, like whatever works. Again, it's kind of like, are you amassing the fitness that you need to get to 100 miles? And are you amassing the confidence that you need to be able to do that 100 miles?
I love that you say that, because I think it just depends on what makes you excited, right, for training. Because I know like it also, we've been in times, I mean, earlier when I was training for Western States 10 years ago, right? Or not quite 10 years ago, 8 years ago, right? It's like I was doing more of the back-to-back long runs, right? Like I was doing more marathon type, like I'll just do a 20-mile long run on the roads and then 18 miles the next day once in a while. But it was mostly because I was stuck on the roads. I didn't have access to trail in Dallas and things like that. And so, I think it also just kind of depends on like the space you're in, right? What makes you excited for training? So I love that you say that, because I think you can evolve a lot as a person over time. And with that, it's your running probably evolves as well, right? Like what makes you excited to get out there and be prepared. That's pretty good to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a great point too, because I think like what you highlighted there is like so much of this is somewhat irrelevant if you don't start with what do you actually have available that's sustainable within the context of your lifestyle. And it's like if you had decided, you know what, I'm going to go out on Saturday and Sunday and even go very, very easy and just spend 3, 4, maybe 5 hours out there on both days and do that even for a semi-frequent time frame, but then your family hates you on Sundays for like a growing number of weeks, and those track workouts start becoming more like nauseating than they are beneficial. So you just start building up so many negatives and trying to live such an unsustainable lifestyle for you that you're not doing, even if that was like the perfect plan on paper, it wasn't for you. So what's the point of even trying to force it at that point?
Yeah. Yeah. And so I kind of just tried to do the things that sort of fell into place, and that, like Nicole was saying, that just felt good and felt right.
And clearly it was the right plan, because it's, you finished first. So there's not really a whole lot of room to improve upon.
Yeah.
Pam, I am curious, because I know you were working at the time and you had kids, which is just like, that's a lot. Tell us more about like balance, because there's this concept of like balance. And I think there's kind of like, it's an interesting word, because it's almost like, do you want to be balanced, or do you want to ensure that certain aspects are highlighted for various parts of the week, right? And then I'm just curious, like your thoughts on that and how you kind of accomplished it all. But
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, everybody's got limited time in the week, right? It's a finite number of hours that you
right.
have to work with. And so, I mean, you kind of have to say, where are you going to distribute those hours? And, some things are going to get pushed to the side and some things you're going to spend the time on. For me, work was non-negotiable. Like I had to go to work or I was going to get fired.
Right.
Family was kind of non-negotiable. Like I needed to be there for my family. And then, I wanted to get the running in. But that was probably the most negotiable of them, and so if I had to tweak things here or there, like that was sort of my hobby or whatever, voluntary thing. So that was a little bit sometimes, like I would say, I'd have to alter or tweak things, but and everything else for me kind of got pushed off. Like I wasn't a TV watcher. I read way fewer books than I would like to admit. I didn't socialize with a lot of stuff. I didn't go see movies. And those were the things that I didn't have time for on my schedule. So, you can't balance everything, right? Some of the things have to get kind of pushed off and you have to acknowledge that. But the biggest thing for me, I think, to get the running in, to make sure that I didn't have to sacrifice the training, I had to get up early. Like I was an early person and I had to get up pretty much every workday. I would get up at 4:20 and be out the door and be running by 5 a.m. And just get it done before work. I wasn't a twice a day person. For me, again, it was like I needed to get the run done and I just didn't have the time to commit to doing something in the evening, because the evening hours was like when I needed to spend the time with family. And I didn't really have time at lunch at work to, get a lunch run in or something. So I just tried to get, one solid workout in the morning, check it off the list as first thing in the morning, and then kind of be done with it and have the rest of my day sort of dedicated to work and family. And then, like I said, Sundays, I really tried to focus on doing something. Like after my long run on Saturday, I pretty much could do, whatever I wanted with the family. I might do a little easy run on Sunday, but nothing that took an extraordinary amount of time away or like really prevented us from doing something together. So.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you explain that, because I think it's just an interesting mindset where it's like you listed some of the things that you sacrificed in order to make this happen, and there's two major things that just weren't even options on the table. So that left room for your training preparation, but it came at the cost of a lot of your other hobbies and interests that like it's one of those things where it's like you pick a block of time in life, like I'm going to really focus on this goal at Western States for this few months, and I'm going to put these other things on the back burner for now and obviously come back to them later. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel, but you also have this like very finely developed schedule where, when that alarm clock goes off at 4:20 in the morning, in your mindset, it's not like, you know what, maybe I should push this to the afternoon, or maybe I should just sleep in a little bit and then, you start my day an hour later. It was like, it's now or it's not happening. And I think that mindset is really interesting, at least for like a time frame of just getting so disciplined leading into the race itself, where now you sort of have this lifestyle. And I've talked to Nicole about this before, because like we've mentioned, her lifestyle is similar in the sense that she's got a demanding job. So like things have to happen when they can happen. There's not a lot of flexibility outside of it to some degree. And it's like, sometimes I think you're training a mental component that, as long as it doesn't just completely exhaust you from like if you don't get overwhelmed by it in the process, and it comes at you at a sustainable enough rate where you actually get good at it, by the time that race comes around, you're so mentally able to just tackle a very long day that it may actually help with that side of things. What are your thoughts about kind of that mental side and how that actually plays out?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. If you've put so much of yourself into it, then you really want to focus on that race and have that race go as well as you can, because you're like, wow, I did make all these sacrifices for it. The other thing I find is kind of the mental side is, a lot of people say they hate tapering, and like by the time I get to the taper, I'm like, oh, hallelujah.
Movies.
I don't have to get up at 4:30 this morning. I can get up at 5:30 because I'm only running 4 miles or whatever it is. So like, I think that kind of helps too, to sort of like just have that mental like reset before the race starts with the taper, is you're kind of ready for it. And so it's not like you're waiting around antsy or kind of like angry because you have to taper. So I always like that part of it as well.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if you feel this way, Pam, but I almost feel like I tend to have less time to worry about the race, like the busier I get, especially
Yeah.
with work things, because it's like, oh, there's another like fire going off over here with work things. It's like it almost just like takes a back seat. And then by the time the race comes, it's like, well, I didn't have to give it a lot of mental energy because I mean, I just was focused
Yeah.
on other things.
But I think what you said, Zach, about like not having the choice, like that in a lot of ways made it easier. Cause like you said, it was like, I'm going to get up and run or I'm not going to run. And so there is no choice. It's like, if I want to do the training, I have to do it. And I actually am struggling more now that I'm basically not working to get all my runs in. Cause it's like, just like you said, oh, should I get up? Should I do it in the afternoon? Should I go a little later? Oh, I don't have friends to run with. And you kind of like start bargaining with yourself and it's like, well, I
Mhm.
don't really have to do 10 today. I could just do 6 today. And, for Western States, it was kind of like, nope, I'm going to get up. I'm going to do 10. And that's the end of it. Like there's no question and stuff. And so in some ways that actually takes less mental energy as well, because it's like the decisions are already laid out for you.
Mhm. Yeah, I think when I was still teaching full time, I was started to recognize that like ahead of time to some degree because I had summers basically free. So like I would get a taste of what it would be like to like just train and race and get an idea what that lifestyle is like, where you have that open schedule and you can move things around, like whether I ran in the morning or the afternoon or the evening was like sort of up to me. And one thing I recognized from that was like I need to, if there aren't firm like the parameters in place, you need to put them there to some
Yeah.
degree at least. Or you're going to end up like what you were saying, just saying, oh, well, I can just push this. And then it either doesn't happen or happens at like a diminished quality or something like that because you just decided to do it at a time that just ended up not being the right time to do it. And yeah, and then when I ended up stepping away from teaching and building my own business, it was like that was another transition where it's like I had this like semi-flexible schedule where I can still like I can move things around a lot easier than I could when I was teaching, but I still definitely need to have some structure that I hold myself accountable to in order to make sure that there's a semblance of that. Like, here's the window of time you have to train. If you pass up on this window, it's off the table. So you have that little bit of sense of urgency to make sure you're kind of staying organized and on task and all that stuff. And it's a good message, I think, to hear.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to get into, and I'm sure Nicole is too, and this is something I think we can probably improve on a little bit at Western States this year based on what we've done in the past, is just the topical cooling side of stuff.
Yeah.
I know like you wrote a really popular article in the ultra running circles after the race about how you went about preparation for the race day in terms of trying to stay cool despite it being hot. When did that process begin? Because I'm sure it wasn't something you just started doing on race day. What were you doing in training to get yourself ready to kind of manage the heat?
Yeah, so I don't probably do the same type of heat training that a lot of people do. I have never gone in a run in a puffy coat. I don't wear multiple layers. In fact, in Oregon, most of the time in the spring, it's quite pleasant to run, and it's not hot at all. For me, the majority of heat training is just sauna in the 3 weeks leading up to the race. So I just do the 3 weeks of sauna, trying to get up to about 45 minutes of time. I do all passive sauna training. Some people do the active, like you're doing jumping jacks or jogging, or that's the same thing as going for a run in a puffy coat. And for me, like I felt like my workouts were better if I just could run them at the temperature that I was most comfortable at. Like I didn't want to sacrifice a workout, running at 110 degrees in a puffy coat. I just felt like I couldn't run that well. And so I would just get my body temperature up from the run and then go straight to the sauna and just sit in the sauna for, as long as I could handle it and kind of read stupid magazines or whatever. People magazine was a favorite because you didn't have to concentrate on it. But my biggest thing was on race day management. And, this sounds stupid, but like it's really true, is like you want to get cool before you get hot. And so, you want to start cooling yourself off. Like you don't want to be overheated and then say, okay, it's time to cool myself off. You got to start early and not get to that point where you're overheated. And so coming in, I think it's Duncan Canyon. It's like 9 o'clock in the morning and I already was starting with ice. Like I had ice down my shirt, in my hat. I had it in my bottles. I had an extra bottle. I froze most of my bottles the night before. So I had frozen bottles that I could put in my pack or like half frozen bottles. And so like the cold ice against my chest while I was carrying water was also a cooling agent. And then every single water stop was like get in and then don't just get wet, like get cool, like make sure you're in the water till you're cool. And you really feel like, okay, now I'm a little chilled, and then you're getting out, because that's what's bringing your body temperature down. A little splash of water here and there isn't going to do anything. And then I ran with a huge ice bandana, and I put it in front. A lot of people I know tie it and put it behind their back, but for me, I put it in front, and I just tucked it under the strap of my vest. And because then it was on my heart, and the heart is where all your blood is going through, and so it was cooling my blood as it was sitting on my heart there, sitting on my chest. So I felt like that was like more significant cooling. And then, I guess the sort of the more infamous one is the cotton t-shirt. I did wear the cotton t-shirt. I knew I wanted to be as wet as possible for as long as possible. And the whole reason that people have gotten away from cotton is because cotton holds so much water. It holds your sweat in. But to me, it was like on race day, that was going to be a benefit. I wanted it to hold as much water as possible. I wanted it to stay really wet. And I had a lot of people after the race that told me things like, you were the wettest person out there. You never looked dry. You always were soaking. You looked like a drowned rat, all the things. And I think you're starting to see that more and more. I think people are embracing that at Western States. But back 10 years ago, like, I kind of think that I was sort of like leading the movement in getting like just soaking wet and staying soaking wet for the entire race. And unfortunately, to manage the heat, that's kind of what you have to do, is just be really wet and really cool for as long as possible.
Yeah, I mean, you were the first person I heard actually make that like a focal point. You get, whether people were doing it or not, it's like they weren't highlighting it as a piece to their puzzle to the degree that I think you did. And I found that interesting. And you're right. I think now, 10 years later, we're seeing companies build products specifically for, you built all your stuff to do that, like the ice bandana.
No, I sewed my bandana. I sewed a pouch in my sports bra. I did all kinds of silly things, but yes, now there's products for that.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like, I actually wonder about the trajectory of that too, because I think there's still a lot of growth with that, where you can get like real form-fitting like articles of clothing that are just very, very convenient to either, and maybe it's not even ice at some point, where it's something that can maintain a coolness for longer, that is built right into something. And it's just, yeah, who knows where that'll go if the demand for it gets to a point where people are winning or losing races based on it.
Yeah, well, I do think that to some degree they will be, only because I think staying cool and keeping your body temperature down is going to be a way to maximize performance. So yeah, somebody who's overheating is not going to be able to give their best. But yeah, like you said, 10 years ago, I watched people go into the aid station, and I commented on this after the race too. Like, people would go in, they'd grab one sponge, go like, shh, and there'd be like 5 drops of water fall on them, and then they'd run out. Yeah. And I was like taking a bath in the sponge buckets. I was like, like bathing around, getting it all over me and stuff. And I'd be like, how are these people going with like one sponge of water? And so I do think, yeah, now there's kind of like the dunk method. And I think that's a good start, but, also using the ice and sort of like other cooling ways to stay as cool as possible is kind of going to help, especially on the hot years. And 2013 was one of the hottest, so it was particularly important then.
Did the creeks were full that year? Or?
Yeah, there were places that you could definitely get in the water. I know when you go down like Cal Street, whatever, there's like a little like kind of well that's all like got moss and other grime in that. And I stuck my head in that, it's probably not the most sanitary thing to do, but like it worked in terms of staying cool.
Yeah, I'll deal with this virus on Monday.
Yeah. Right.
Oh, that's awesome. Nicole, what are your thoughts about topical cooling
Oh,
or heat
no, I
management?
mean, I appreciate hearing all of Pam's tricks. I mean, I think I've been fortunate to receive some of the support from others like Meredith, who's close to Pam, who's probably learned all the tricks and you, but I definitely have a lot that I could do better. So I could also be better at carrying bottles into the canyons and things like that. So I have a lot that I could improve upon. So
Yeah. I mean, you talked about carrying the bottle. So I had a pack that I was drinking from, but I actually carried an extra bottle that was had some ice in it, because one, cooling on your hands helps you to feel cooler. You also have a lot of blood that runs through your hands. So that was another way to, just by carrying cold bottles helps you to cool off. But then I had that extra bottle that I would use as just as a head bottle. And so I'd have the extra water that when you're halfway up to Robinson Flat and you're baking in the sun, you had an extra bottle that you could pour over your head. And I would fill that bottle up at streams and stuff and carry it. And so a couple miles down the road, I could still get myself wet even when I wasn't near a creek.
No, I love that you say that. For me, it's like maybe I'll carry more of a pack this time and really just pack it with ice even, because I just definitely good to be thinking through all of this.
There's a funny Nicole Western State story around this topic, which is why I always prod her about it, where there was one year I was crewing and pacing for her, and we would have been at mile 38. You were going to head into the canyons. And like I was living in just outside of Sacramento at the time. So I'd hang out with all the like Auburn, Western States folks, and they'd have all the stories and all the, you got to do this, got to do that. They had it on lockdown. So they would always tell me, you do not go into the canyons without 2 bottles. And at no point, it's like, that's a death wish to go into the canyon without 2 bottles. So I'm convinced, I'm like, okay, make sure Nicole goes into the canyons with 2 bottles. Nicole hates 2 bottles. So she goes into the aid station and she goes in the aid station. I've got the bottles ready. And I'm like, I finally convinced her, I'm like, take the second bottle. So she's like, okay, fine, I'll take it. She grabs the bottle, turns around to go out the aid station, gets about 4 feet away from me, drops the second bottle and just takes off. And I look over at one of the guys who's at the aid station, who happened to be one of the people from Auburn that was telling me that. And he just looks at me. He's like, well, you tried. She ended up finishing 6th. So it wasn't like, I couldn't really give her too much.
I've got to
too
do
much
better
about
with the packs, I think, because I can't carry 2 bottles. It's like, for whatever reason, that just like gets at me. There's no words. I don't know why I can't handle it. I
don't want to carry 2 bottles either, but to have 2 bottles for sure. Yeah. I think I would have 2 bottles, like one in each side of the pack, and then a handheld. So I had 3 for a lot of the time when it was super hot. And one of them was only just for, like dunking and getting wet.
Yeah. That's good. I think
so that one gets empty pretty soon. So if you have the pack,
the 2. I don't know. I feel like off kilter or something. It's just a me problem. It's no one else. I don't know.
Awesome. Well, Pam, this has been awesome to hear both your experience as an ultra runner on the first episode of this 2-part series, and then your kind of deep dive into Western States and everything kind of went into that. I think it's really fun to hear what was working for you across a variety of different kind of ultra marathons and lifestyle things to kind of make it all work. And then, everything that kind of went into 2013. So thanks so much for giving us some time to chat about this.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, and good luck, Nicole.
Thank you, Pam.
Hey folks, just a quick reminder that this episode's sponsors are my friends at LMNT Electrolytes. They have a wide range of electrolyte supplements and are currently offering listeners of this podcast a free sample pack with purchase. If you are interested in checking them out and letting them know that you came to them through here, you can go to drinklmnt.com/HPO or to the show sponsor landing page, which is just zachbitter.com/HPO sponsors. Links to that are in the show notes as well. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Human Performance Outliers podcast with Zach Bitter.